Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Adam Stokes. Before I bring him on, I want to remind you that you can always get new regular episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and of course, all podcast platforms. Check us out on Rokfin. It's where you get all our premium content. You can get all our regular shows and all the premium content from all of the amazing content creators on Rokfin. We also have a merch store up. We've got awesome t-shirts, stickers, bags, all kinds of cool stuff, mugs. That link is in the description or fknstore.net. We also have a really cool new affiliate you should check out, especially if you really want to see what goes on in our sky at night. Hoffman Optics at UFOnightvisiongoggles.com. Check out their military-grade Gen 3 and beyond night vision goggles. You can see everything with these goggles. They offer UFO night vision tours where you can go out into the night. With this amazing equipment, you can see what's really going on in our skies, and you can even purchase these amazing military-grade goggles. Just be sure to put Forbidden1 as a promo code in the order notes. And finally, if you are reaching that gray hair stage in life, it's time to check out C60 Purple Power. It may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man. I've been taking it for well over a year, and I feel better than I've ever felt. I don't get sick anymore. You can even get C60 for your pets. It's had an amazing effect for our senior dog, including shrinking of her tumors. Just click the link in the description. You can get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Today, I want to welcome Professor Adam Stokes. He has a degree in religion from Duke University and Yale Divinity School. He is the author of From Egypt to Ohio, A Semitic Origin for the Giants of North America, and the Latin Scrolls, Selections from the Five Megaloth, translated from Latin Vulgate. His work has been featured in various magazines and podcasts, and he currently teaches high school Latin and a college course on the Old Testament. Adam, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here, coming to you from Kansas City. I'm normally in New Jersey, but I'm out here for a church conference, so I'm doing very good.
Awesome. Well, I've been looking forward to today, looking forward to talking to you, and we're going to be discussing some of my favorite stuff, our real hidden history, which is really way more amazing and extraordinary than what's currently in our history books, in my opinion. I felt from a very young age that there were many aspects of history that didn't fit into place with the narrative. And the more I learned from researchers like yourself, the more I realized that I don't know anything at all about what really happened in history, but it's starting to trickle in, and we're starting to get a bigger picture of what could have possibly been going on. Tonight is the first time you've been on the show. I'd really love to hear what got you interested in our hidden history. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my video on your end. You won't be able to see me, but the audience will, because we're getting a little bit of a lag, but your video should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So what got you, what got you interested in it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I just mentioned I was at a church conference, and kind of my religious background got me interested in looking at the ancient history of America. I come from a Latter-day Saint tradition, and our sacred scripture is the Book of Mormon, what my denomination calls the Record of the Nephites. And the story there is that you had ancient Jews travel across the Atlantic or Pacific, whatever route people think they might have taken, to North America, and settling there and building a civilization there. And that story got me interested in seeing if there was any support for that claim, and if the history of pre-Columbian America was different than what we traditionally been taught in schools. Traditionally, in schools, we're taught that really nothing happened here until the time of Columbus and later European settlers. We get at best Cahokia, in Illinois. But we don't really, outside of that, scholars don't really talk about the civilizations that were before that time. And if you delve deep, if you delve further, you find that there were many civilizations, amazing civilizations, just as elaborate and just as mighty as ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, or ancient Rome, and that these civilizations had origins from all over the world, and they intermingle with Native American peoples, and a lot of Native American culture, even up until now, has appropriated the cultures of these now defunct empires and these defunct people.
That's really absolutely fascinating. And I'm just wondering if, our modern academia, do you think that it would ever come around to acknowledging some of these things and giving them a second look, or are they even starting to now, maybe?
I think the situation is better now. What you have to understand about modern academia, and especially American academia, is that it was built on a faulty premise. And that premise was that Native Americans had no culture prior to the Europeans settling here. And that was really kind of a propaganda on the part of the United States government, with kind of academia helping to promote this propaganda. Because if you could say that Native Americans had no civilization, it was easier to dehumanize them and take their land. So the one of the founders of the Smithsonian, John Percy, was actually an adamant opponent of any position that would make it seem like the Native Americans had a culture that was prior to Columbus and that was more sophisticated than what you get with later European settlers. So a lot of, whenever the Smithsonian, during his time in the 19th century, mid to late 19th century, whenever someone would bring light to an artifact, a find, skeletal remains, for example, of giants that might push back against this notion of the Native Americans being uncivilized, he sought to suppress that. I think the situation is better today. I think the Smithsonian is trying to kind of reverse that. But what you have to remember is that they're steeped in basically 150, almost 200 years of this anti-Native American narrative. So it's difficult for them to kind of see beyond that. But I think slowly the situation is changing. And I think a lot of that's happening because of independent scholars. So people like Graham Hancock, at mainstream academia ridicules him, but it's forced them to confront a lot of the legitimate issues. He's one of my favorite scholars, one of my favorite researchers. A lot of the issues that he has raised, and they've brought them to light. And I think what you're going to slowly see is a more accurate picture of ancient America.
One of the hugest things is the age of modern humans, or modern Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yeah.
This version of us that has intelligence and is able to understand agriculture and mathematics and all these advanced things. How far back do you think we can trace this advanced human?
That's an excellent question. I think that we go back way longer. The advanced human goes back way longer than Darwinian evolution gives us credit for. Now, I'm not a biologist, so I don't want to speak too far out of my field. But I do know from an archaeological perspective, and Michael Cremo talks about this in his book Forbidden Archaeology, that they have found skeletal remains of humans just like us, not Cro-Magnon man, not Homo erectus, but Homo sapien, from millions of years ago in all parts of the world, including North America. So I think that we go back much further than mainstream academia, mainstream science claims. Now, that's not to say these other groups did not exist. So they clearly arise. Cro-Magnon, the Denisovans arise. They interbreed with these advanced humans, and they kind of die out for whatever reason. I have some theories about that. But human beings as we are now, I think, have basically always existed, or at least have existed for millions of years.
And that, that would answer a lot of questions that we have throughout our history, about our advanced knowledge of the stars and how we were
Yeah,
able to construct some of these megalithic structures and things like that.
yeah,
With the ancient aliens culture, everybody likes to immediately point to, well, aliens did it. It could have been us. Well, not necessarily. We could have been a lot more advanced back
yeah,
then. You know,
and
if aliens were
yeah.
involved, who knows? But it could have been we were that advanced to be able to do that.
I think that's a great point. And one thing that's often overlooked, I think, even just us using the term advanced, we think that in the 21st century, we are the pinnacle of civilization. And I think a lot of people miss is that there were civilizations before us that were just as advanced as we were. If you talk about Atlantis or Lemuria, and they had technology. They didn't need like a cloud or anything. They had this stuff in their head with their psychic ability, and they had these flying cars and these flying vehicles that moved around. They were just as advanced. But what you see is they talk about this in Hinduism, the cyclic nature of history. So great empires will arise, then they'll fall. And when they fall, it seems like things are primitive. And kind of primitive and backwards, and then society will rebuild itself. It'll fall, and so this cycle continues. So we're just looking at history from where the last great empires left off that fell, and then we think, we were just these primitive guys, hunter-gatherers running and trying to collect berries and stuff like that, when way before this time and lost to the later memory of the people, there were civilizations that were far more advanced than us. And if you think just about the Greeks and the Romans, I always like to mention this, the Greeks had a computer even in their time. So there was advanced technology then. We are not the pinnacle of civilization. And I think I always mention that because it's very humbling. We can learn from history, we can learn from the lessons of the past and not repeat them so that we don't repeat this cycle. But I think we are very much in danger of repeating this cycle of societies that have reached their peak and then start to crash.
Let's talk about one of these more covered up aspects of our history, which is the fact that it's almost impossible to dispute now, but giants had coexisted with us and roamed the
Absolutely.
earth.
Hmm.
The question is, to what extent, how large were these giants? Are some of the myths true about them? I want to kind of explore what you've come to understand about the giants that walked the earth in our ancient past. And it was a kind of global phenomenon, right?
Yes, yes. So you get traditions of giants all throughout different cultures. So Irish culture, Jack and the Beanstalk being the most famous. There's also a female warrior giant in Irish culture. I'm blanking on her name. Um, there in German culture, you have giants. In British culture, you have Gog and Magog. And with a lot of these giants, you'll see connections to the biblical giants. Now, people will push back and say, "Oh, that's mythology." But when you look at the Old Testament, I always tell my students this. Yes, you get a lot of mythology, but you also get a lot of history. And by the time that you come to something known as the Deuteronomic history, that's a real fancy word. I'll just say that's the story that you get in the Bible from the books of Joshua all the way to Second Kings. Those are historical records of the different kings who ruled Israel. So we're talking about factual history. Most biblical scholars will not deny that. And in that history, you have numerous mention of the giants. So in Joshua, you have the Valley of the Giants. You have the children of the Anakim, who are the giants. And then you have giants such as the Philistine giants, such as Goliath of Gath. And these giants, they seem to be both related as well as distinct from each other. So the giants in the Valley of the Giants mentioned in Joshua are probably a little bit different than the Philistine giants. We know that just by a description of them. So Goliath, for example, I believe he's only 9 feet, but some of the giants, such as the Egyptian giant that one of David's commanders fights is over 12 feet and has multiple hands and feet, or multiple fingers and multiple toes. So we're looking at different species of giants, possibly intermixing with one another. And what I argue in my book is that they intermixed with ancient Israel, and so you get this giant hybrid. You have a lot of Israelites who would be considered giant or tall in stature, as the biblical term is used, and they create kind of their own unique race. And then at various periods in time, especially periods of intense persecution, they flee the Palestine region and they go westward into Europe and even further, crossing the seas into North America. And so I argue in my book that the giants that you get with the Hopewell and Adena cultures in the Midwest really have their origin in the ancient Near East, in Palestine, and with this group of Israelite giants.
Man, that's fascinating, thinking that they could have, these different groups of interbreeding species of giants. It's really fascinating. And by the way, anyone in the audience, if you have any questions as we go, please just leave those in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. Now, they've had some researchers kind of allude to that, since there was, these giant humans in the past, that a lot of our nature and reality and everything surrounding us was just larger. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, I'd absolutely agree with that. So you have, in the biblical accounts, you have giants intermixing with human beings right from the very beginning of the Old Testament. So in Genesis 6, you have the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Ancient astronaut theory takes that as alien spaceships crashing to Earth. I take that as just a reference to a lost fallen civilization. But in any case, these giants intermix with human beings. And if you look at ancient writings, not just the Bible, but if you go to Greco-Roman culture, looking at the writings of Homer, for example, when Homer talks about Odysseus and Hector and Achilles, he says that these men were of greater stature and greater health and greater strength and greater virility than the men of Homer's own age. So I think what you see is with this giant human interbreeding, the humans that emerge from that, they're not quite giants, it's the demi-giants, but in any case, they're much stronger and much more powerful than regular humans. And as that intermixing ceases, that starts to decline.
Now, I just got a comment from Revolt Records in the audience. He says, Viking expeditions to North America. And yes, I've heard about accounts from these expeditions of encountering giants. What about you?
Yes.
Have you looked into this at all?
It's something I need to look in a bit more, but I have heard of those stories. So there is one of the texts that I have my students translate. My main job, as you mentioned, is that of a high school Latin teacher. And there's a really kind of boring Latin textbook that I use with them. And then when I want to have them do something different, I have them read what are known as Neo-Latin texts. So these are texts around from the 18th and 19th century where people try to use Latin, try to revive Latin. And what one of these texts are, it's kind of a preserved account from the 12th century when the Vikings are making their expeditions of a Viking encounter with a giant. Absolutely fascinating. So I always have my kids look at it. But it was the person who wrote it was a Norwegian monk, and he wrote it down in basically ecclesiastical Latin, and then some guy later took the text and converted it to Neo-Latin. But it's an ancient text, primary source for an encounter between Vikings and giants. And one thing I always like to point out about this, I think that was a great question, whoever raised that in the chat room. the Vikings, their encounter with the giants is hostile. It's not because we think of the Vikings as just, warmongers attacking people. That's not true. They actually had a pretty sophisticated culture. The giants attacked the Vikings, so the giants were the aggressors. And we get this a lot in Native American folklore as well. The giants attack the Native Americans. The giants are the aggressors. And it's through this kind of culture of violence, we see this in the Old Testament as well, which I believe results in the giants' own destruction in North America.
Oh, I definitely want to get to that. First, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of described features of the giants and some things of that nature. Now, earlier, I guess you mentioned that they may have lived longer than regular humans. Is that correct?
Yes. So
how long
do you
think they may have lived?
Yeah, well, people such as Stitching. Now, Stitching takes a UFO approach to it, but he points out something that is very, very significant. He looks at the dynasty of giants that you get in Sumerian texts. Sumeria is another ancient Near Eastern culture, and those giants lived for hundreds of years, 200 years, 300 years or so. And even in the Old Testament, a lot of people say this is mythological. There is a point to be raised there, but a lot of the earliest people that you get in the Old Testament live for hundreds of years as well. So Adam, supposedly the first man, lives for about 900 years. But the giants
and these Sumerian kings as well.
Yes. And so the giants of North America probably had expanded lifespans as well. So one thing to note is that not all giants are, again, of the same species. So we have multiple different species of giants coming and interacting, and some giants would have lived longer than others. And depending on how much giants mix with the normal humans, normal-sized humans in the region, that would have decreased their lifespan as well. So they may not have lived as long as some of their predecessors did.
Now, some of the other accounts from North America include like red hair. You mentioned earlier multiple digits, like 6 digits on each hand or feet. Multiple rows of teeth, I've heard as well. Now,
razor-like teeth.
Yeah.
Yes. So these all. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that are going on here to explain these different species of giants. So some of them are genetic anomalies. And then others of them are different races of giants migrating to North America at different times. So you have giants with kind of the elongated, the huge skull. Then you have the red-haired giants. The giants with the huge skull, it's my contention, and this is other researchers have argued this as well, is that these are probably related to the same exact giants that we get in British lore. And that big skull they had was because they had a big psychic brain, which allowed them to move things. So the sites in England, Stonehenge, for example, were probably built by these giants, but a different species from the red-haired giants. However, all of them are related in this propensity for violence. So the red-haired giants, I think it's Chiseta Indian giants, they were cannibals, and they used to feed on the Native Americans. And Native Americans got upset with this. They rebelled against the giants, basically eventually killed them all off. So all of these giants, no matter what their race, no matter what their species, or even if they were interbred, they had this propensity for violence.
Now, since you're talking about how they were kind of killed off, and they just started interbreeding with humans, that's part of why, their size would diminish. Is this the reason, the complete reason for them vanishing from the planet is, between the interbreeding and us killing them?
I think so. I think I would say them even killing each other. So with the Hopewell and Adena cultures, which in my own view are kind of synonymous, the Hopewell and Adena, by the way, are not their actual names. Those are the names of the dudes in the 19th century who owned real estate in those areas. So we don't know what their names were for hundreds of years. People called them mound builders. So, for example, President Thomas Jefferson, President Abraham Lincoln always referred to them as mound builders. It's my view that these people are synonymous with the Nephites and Lamanites in the book. You can hear me now?
Yes. We may have to go without the video because when you turn on the video, it just starts getting garbled unless you can find a good spot.
Okay. I'm right here.
That sounds good. Yeah, this sounds
okay,
good.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess I was saying about the giants and why they become extinct. So a lot of that has to do with their propensity for violence, not only towards normal-sized human beings, but also towards each other. So the Hopewell and Adena, for example, those aren't their real names. Those are the names of the people who owned real estate on the property where their artifacts and their remains were found in the 19th century. Presidents Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln just called them mound builders. And it's my contention that they're synonymous with the Nephites and Lamanites mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And in that story, they kill each other off through violent bloodshed. So I think that the giants, first off, their extinction is caused by themselves killing each other off, and also the conflicts that they have with normal-sized human beings. So they're fighting both amongst themselves and with the non-giants. And an empire that does that cannot stand, it cannot endure fighting all the time, and so they eventually become extinct. They eventually wipe themselves out.
Now, up until how recent do you think the last of these giants existed?
That's a great question. So I think that the giant civilization destroyed itself right at the end of the Hopewell and Adena period, at least in North America. That would have been around 500 CE that they would have ceased to exist. However, I think that a lot of their culture and their DNA continues to exist in Native American culture. So I always point this out to people. We think of the tallest people in the world as being, from Africa, from basketball players, for example, but they're actually Native Americans. So the tallest people in the world, some of the tallest people, depending on which tribe, are Native Americans, not from Africa. And I think that has to do with interbreeding with giants way back in their history. It's interesting. I don't think that all of the giants were completely eradicated, completely destroyed. Perhaps the ones in North America, but we continue to get traditions way after the Hopewell and Adena in other parts of the world where giants continue to exist. I know on your show a little while back, you had a military person who was talking about a discovery of a giant that he found in a cave in Afghanistan. So I think the giants who weren't killed went into hiding. I think it makes perfect sense that military guy would have found a giant there, because I think the giants probably went to what we would call the inner world, the hollow world underneath us to try and hide out.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And I want to remind everybody in the audience, if you have any questions for Adam, just go ahead and leave them in the chat and we will get to them. Jeff Goldblum. Hey, Jeff. Jeff asks, did the Phoenicians come to North America?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, they did. We have some of the best evidence for kind of cultural diffusionism, where one culture comes to another place and influences the culture of that region. With the Phoenicians, we have multiple Phoenician inscriptions, Phoenician coins in North America, and we also have narratives of Phoenician. We actually have not narratives, images, iconography, ancient iconography in North America of Phoenician ships coming into the rivers of North America, going up the Mississippi River and the like. And Scott Walter did something on this a little while back, and there was also an official project done with it. A man, really wealthy guy, built a Phoenician ship and saw if he could, and tried to see if he could take it to North America. And he got within 40 miles of Florida. So it was entirely possible using a Phoenician ship from ancient times to have gotten to America. We have evidence for that. And this is something that this isn't just Adam Stokes talking. Modern academics, modern anthropologists and archaeologists have to support, have to argue for this. So there's a very famous book, Ancient North America, by Jennings, who was a mainstream academic scholar. In the back of his book, he puts it in the appendix, but he has a bunch of evidence for Phoenician migration to America. He doesn't put it at the front of the book, I guess because of afraid of academic ridicule, academic scorn, but he does include it. So this is something that's universally recognized. I'm glad the caller mentioned that.
All right, very cool. Now, when it comes to the construction, like we were touching on earlier, of some of these amazing megalithic structures, some of which that it can't even recreate today. Do you think that it was possible that it was made slightly easier if they were being built by giants? Do you think that may have been the case?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because for certain places such as Fort Ancient and the Newark Earthworks, both of which I had the opportunity to visit last year, we know, and anthropologists are stuck here, because we know that for the amount of dirt and earth that it took to build those earthworks and mounds, there were not enough people, normal-sized humans in the region, who could have done that in the course of time that it took to build these earthworks. So this is where kind of your independent research comes in, and you realize that these earthworks, the best possible way to explain how they were built and the time that they were built is that giants built them, since giants could cover cover space more quickly, and gather more earth, more materials to make these mounds. And also, I think when you're talking about mounds, not just in North America, but earthworks all over the world, going back to Britain and to Stonehenge, with the giants with the elongated skulls, they're using their psychic ability to erect these monoliths. Same with Göbekli Tepe.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned the elongated skulls, because that's what I was actually coming to. People like, Brian Forrester have explored this in Peru, but it's all a global phenomenon again, and they are often found near monolithic, megalithic structures, these
Yes.
elongated skull beings. And, some of them discovered are the product of the headboarding that some of these indigenous tribes would use to emulate what they saw, but some of them were natural. Some of them had, I think it's, I forget the name, the at the base of the skull, something magnum, it's in a different place. All these natural biological things that have occurred in the forming of this elongated skull that tells anyone that, that's a natural thing that wasn't made intentionally. Do you think that that's connection with these giants?
Yes, absolutely. So we often, I think in pop culture, one of the movies I actually like, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It had these elongated tall creatures, but it claimed that they were UFOs, that they were extraterrestrial. Right. I think that they were just plain old giants. And something that you just mentioned, I want to point out as well. So what is kind of tricky in the field is determining what is original and what is imitation. So I talk about the mounds, And I'll get pushback from people saying, well, there's some mounds, they've never found any gigantic remains, so you're clearly wrong. Well, those mounds date to later and are probably in imitation of the earlier mounds made by giants. Likewise, with the elongated skull, you have, as you just mentioned, people who seem to be born with this. It's natural to them. And then in other places, it's just, like you said, imitation. Native inhabitants, again, kind of suggesting influence, intermingling with the native populations. They imitated out of reverence for these giants, even though these giants were violent, even though they were cruel. They were also amazing. You see somebody who's 9 feet or 12 feet, you're in awe of them, and you want to emulate that. And the ancient world being a very spiritual place, they try to bind their children's heads in honor of the quote unquote God.
Now, these giants that you said that they had different, subspecies, that they were kind of interbreeding with each other, and that most of them were violent. Do you think that goes across the board with all of these species, that pretty much all of them had a natural tendency to be violent?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think of even violent in a good way. So you think of the Irish female warrior giant. She is a good giant, but she's a warrior. And most of the giants come off much more negative than that. So giant, for example, in Irish folklore, Jack and the Beanstalk, he's eating people, not very nice. Gog and Magog in British folklore, they're not very nice as well. So this propensity for violence, you see it throughout. Even in African folklore, where it talks about some giants, the giant is always violent. So these creatures are always depicted negatively, almost always, 90% of the time depicted negatively. And I think that's precisely because these legends go back to historical memory of these giants being cruel and violent to non-humans as well as to one another. I mean, to non-giants as well as to one another.
And earlier, we kind of touched on that not only the giants, but even some human civilizations in general in our ancient past may have been extremely advanced. And when we look at some of the evidence for that, like we were talking about the megalithic structures, some of the construction methods. I mean,
Yes.
being able to melt granite and rock and these precise boreholes, and being able to carry huge, massive stones to a quarry. I mean, all these things that we can't really explain how it was done. Even if you throw in, there was a giant doing it, that explains a little tiny piece of it.
Yes.
How advanced do you think that we were? I mean, some researchers even think we had access to the stars, that we could traverse the stars, we could fly. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. So there's always, you mentioned the show Ancient Aliens, and they always show the Mayan dude in the rocket. And they claim that this is evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Now, I don't rule out, I'm a firm believer in UFOs, seen a couple of them myself. I don't rule that out. But I think that we had knowledge that has become lost to us now, that allowed us to get to the stars. I actually absolutely believe that the Mayans got to even the moon or even further, Mars. I think there's a Mars-Mayan connection. Some people have pointed this out. It's something that I'd love to in the future look at in more detail. But I think we absolutely did get to the stars. I talked earlier about Atlantis and Lemuria and how they had flying vehicles. So I don't think any of this would have been impossible in the ancient past. There's a book I always like to point out, and I'll mention it on this show, called Ancient Inventions. It's actually published by Barnes and Noble, so it's actually a pretty mainstream book, and it has about oh my goodness, I'd say about 200 or so inventions of things that we consider modern, but existed way back hundreds and thousands of years ago. So again, we are not the pinnacle of civilization, other societies were just as advanced as we are. And I think that when you look at the civilization of the Nephilim in the Bible, whether that's connected to Atlantis or not, I think there is a connection. But that city was probably just as metropolitan and as high tech as any modern city today. So nothing new under the sun, as the Bible would say.
And if we had these extremely advanced technologies, it seems that there would be, even though highly advanced, a lot different than what we're used to today. Probably even a lot more efficient in some ways. I've heard
yes, because it
researchers
wasn't,
talking about frequency, sound, energy, even consciousness
yes.
being able to be integrated into this technology.
Yes, so the vehicles in Atlantis, for example, probably pushed through like some type of sound wave or something like that, and much more efficient, not destroying the Earth. Very much, to use a modern term, environmentally friendly, much friendlier than what we have today. People, the thing is, people have always known about this technology. Tesla, for example, 100 years ago, was trying to have free energy that was harmless to the environment and to everyone. But for a variety of reasons, always kind of in the modern world, that dollar bill, we have shied away from that. And I think our lust for money and for wealth has really stunted us in using our potential as human beings, our natural potential as human beings, without the use of so much technology. And I think that in that respect, we actually lag way behind our ancient ancestors.
Now, I have a comment in the chat. P. Garrett says he lives by huge native mounds in central Ohio, and he's always wondered what's in them. And I have too. And
Yes.
I've spoke with a few other researchers that have done research into mounds, a couple that have actually excavated a few of them. And it's very interesting, some of the things they found. What are some of the things that you've heard that they're putting in these mounds?
Yes. So if you ever go, just to, in relation to that question, if you ever go to the Newark Earthworks, there is actually a museum there. It wasn't open when I was there, but inside the museum, they have a bunch of artifacts and relics that they've unearthed from the Newark Earthworks. But really fascinating stuff. So we have two types of main objects, three types that have been uncovered at these mounds. One are giant skeletal remains at these big sites. Now, remember, some of these sites are an imitation of these earlier ancient giant sites. So we have the giant remains, and then on the giant remains we have a bunch of jewelry. So we know that these giants were considered the wealthy elite of their society. So we always have jewelry, necklaces, rings, stuff like that. Okay. So we have necklaces, rings, stuff like that, that are found on these giants. They want to be buried with their possessions. Not surprising, we get the same thing all over the world. In Egypt, for example, with the pharaohs. So then we have some of the giant remains. We have the jewelry on them, and then last of all, we have these relics, these clay tablets. Many of them with inscriptions on them, which is really interesting because people say that Native Americans, they did not have any written documentation. They just relied on oral tradition. But we see in a lot of these mounds, we have inscriptions in many of them, and this goes back to what I argue in my book, from Egypt to Ohio. Many of the inscriptions found on these tablets are in a Semitic language, sometimes Egyptian, sometimes Paleo-Hebrew, sometimes a mixture of both. So we know that whoever these giants were, they were not originally indigenous to North America.
Right. And yeah, so they obviously had ability to traverse the planet, so
Yes.
it couldn't be that much far-fetched to think that they had, ability to possibly even traverse the stars, which is really fascinating. Now I want to
Yeah.
remind everyone in the chat, we've got a few minutes left, so please, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop those in there, and we're going to try to get to them. Now, you mentioned a couple of times, we talked about the UFO phenomenon and everything surrounding that in our ancient past. What do you think about what's happening now, man? We've got our mainstream media talking about UFOs. We've got the government releasing classified somewhat information, which it was kind of a letdown, this last report, but you know how that goes.
Not
It's our
surprising.
government.
Yeah.
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 But do you think it's kind of like just a little psychological preparation for the future, or is there other agendas you think behind it? What's going on?
I've just been fascinated by the past couple of years because I think 10 years ago, if you had said I was in a fighter jet and I saw a Tic Tac UFO fly in front of me, that would have been the end of your career. You would have been laughed to scorn. And the person who reported on it, it would have been the end of his or her career, and they would have been laughed to scorn as well. So I think it is, in spite of my disappointment, same as with you on the official report that the Pentagon gave. I think
Right.
that just their ability to address this issue and to take it seriously, at least in the public eye. I think they've known about it, for at least 100 years, but at least in the public eye, I think that is a very, very big step. And I think that we're getting to a point where I think this is all happening primarily because there's no more room for disclosure. And I've bashed modern technology so far in our talk, but I'm actually going to praise it. So in our day and age, yes, you get a lot of fake stuff there. You could create your own UFO video on TikTok, but a lot of the stuff that's out there is authentic and it can't be controlled, and the government can't control it. And a lot of it, like the Tic Tac, is real. So the government's kind of being forced to acknowledge this stuff. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a slow disclosure to the people of something that most of us have known for many years, that we are not alone. And I think the government's always been afraid of how humanity will act, but I think that our religions and our media have kind of been prepping us for this. And I think I don't think that it will cause the mass hysteria that the government thinks that it will.
I agree. I think that the planet's ready to hear this. I think that we've been ready for a long time. I think most people are more fascinated than anything by it, and I think that if we would have anything to worry about, it'd probably be coming from our own government. So,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
these beings wanted to destroy us, it seemed like they could have had thousands of opportunities throughout history, but they
yeah,
haven't.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's something that I think we need to keep an eye on, and it's really fascinating what's going on right now for sure. Okay, P. Garrett, that's a great question. He once thought your thoughts on the petrified giant tree stumps that look like mountains now. And I also want to add these just giant petrified mountains or rocks that look like either beings or giant animals or things like that. We've
Mhm.
had speculative researchers say, oh, yeah, that's a petrified giant. What do you think about that?
Well, going back to at least how I view ancient technology, I think as I said, they were far more advanced than we are. We think basically. I was talking to some of my peers in church the other day about this, the atomic bomb, because we're right near. Like I said, I'm actually in Independence, Missouri, and we were right near the Truman House. And, Harry Truman was the president who dropped the atomic bomb. So we think that the nuclear bomb is the pinnacle of our technology. But I think they had that same type of technology back in ancient times, thousands of years ago. You read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament. That sounds like a lot like a nuclear bomb to me. Same thing if you read the Mahabharata or some of these Hindu myths. So I think that's a great question because I do think some of these petrified remains are what you get after a nuclear event. So these things have been preserved. These things have been preserved, kind of like what you get, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yes, some stuff was obliterated, and some stuff was frozen just where it was. So I think that that's evidence of some type of advanced technology in the past, some disaster possibly with this technology that nonetheless preserve these things.
That would be, yeah, that would make sense. And it's very fascinating to think about because I've seen some pretty compelling petrified images that, even look like people. It's like, wow, that's, it's very interesting to think of that stuff. And again, we got a few minutes, guys. So if you have any questions for Adam, please leave that in the chat. Now, earlier we were kind of talking about if modern academia is ever going to kind of come around. I think at the point we're at right now, there's so many high-level individuals that are in this field that have so much to lose with this information coming out that they're going to do anything possible to keep the status quo where we're at now with all our, boring fake history. And I think that these high-level individuals, until they're out of the picture and maybe even their kids are out of the picture, we may not even see any of this stuff coming out. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, academia is so, and I've mentioned this on other shows as well. It claims to be, objective, but it really follows the cult of, as James Vieira would say, secularism, which has kind of become a religion in and of itself. So and not just that, but just kind of this whole notion that anything that doesn't seem to agree with natural law, or that is not materialistic. That idea that anything not materialistic needs to be rejected, that's kind of become the gospel for academia. So when you talk about these things, giants, for example, psychic abilities, academia laughs at that. But what it's really done is kind of put itself in a bubble where it's really unable to explain many of the things that we find in the ancient record. But again, it's been like this for hundreds of years. So it's kind of hard to kind of redo or to fix a system that's been around, for hundreds of years. A lot of people have a lot to lose. You can lose your tenure if you're talking about this stuff, and academia would just completely have to reshape itself. I think that this materialistic view, and especially the Darwinian view, has shaped not just science but also the humanities in a way that it's very difficult to fix at this point. But I think, as I was talking about the Smithsonian earlier, the modern Smithsonian, I think they're slowly coming around. But yes, I totally agree with you. There's a lot at stake for people to look at another perspective, even a more accurate and more genuine perspective.
Yeah, and there's probably a lot of very terrified people in those high levels right now that see this information coming out, but
yes,
it's a good thing. We need to keep it coming, and we
absolutely.
need individuals like yourself to keep pumping through this information. And Adam, thank you so much for coming by today. That was fantastic information. If my audience
pleasure.
wants to find out more about you, find your books, let us know, website, social media, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So my book From Egypt to Ohio can be found on Amazon.com. You can get it as a Kindle book or as a paperback. The Kindle's cheaper if you want to get that. My other books, Perspectives on the Old Testament and the Latin Scrolls, which are kind of just Bible textbooks, you can find those on Amazon as well. I have an Instagram site where I post a lot of information about giants, Adam the Giant Guy 2019. On Instagram, just type in Adam the Giant Guy, it'll pop up. I also have a Facebook page, a business page to my Latin tutoring site, Lingua Classica. And on there, it's not just Latin tutoring, because that would be really boring, but I put a lot of stuff about ancient history on that site as well. So those are the places you can find me.
Awesome. All right, everyone, check out Adam's stuff. That was amazing. I'd love to have you back on because we just barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff.
Indeed. That'd be great.
Awesome. All right, Adam. Well, thank you so much for coming on again. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening.